I'm Kay Martinez. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I am the director of EDIJ Training here at Lesley University. In this video, I want to do a very brief overview of the history and particularly the social justice movements behind why we celebrate Pride Month in June. So, first, let's start with a bit of trivia. Take a guess. Uh, in what year did President Clinton declare June the first lesbian and gay Pride Month? So I'll give you a second just to think of a year and see if you're right. So in 1999, we had the first official lesbian and gay Pride Month recognized in June. Last one. In what year did President Obama declare June the first LGBT month? So you notice there's um, B and T, which I covered in the first video, which stand for bisexual and transgender, in addition to the L and the G, which stands for lesbian and gay. So take a second and guess what year you think this happened in. So rather recently, in 2011, we saw a shift in the nomenclature used for June to be inclusive of additional identities. But where did all this come from? And why is June recognized as Pride Month? So I'm going to do a very brief overview, which I hope inspires you to look more into this topic. Maybe I will touch on something that you hadn't heard of before. So I hope this sparks your curiosity to learn more. And if I miss something that you think should be included, feel free to let me know as well. So June is recognized as Pride Month largely in honor of the events that occurred in New York City at the Stonewall Inn on June 28th, 1969. It is often referred to as the birthplace of LGBTQ pride. So, what happened at the Stonewall Inn? Well, there was a raid led by the New York City Police Department, or the NYPD, where at the time they were looking for uh, bars, restaurants, or places where there was believed to be homosexual and or transgender people gathering together. It was not legal at the time, and many LGBTQ people often faced harassment and targeting by the NYPD and other people, as our identities were not legal, they were not celebrated, or frankly, allowed in many places. So after this initial interaction at the Stonewall Inn, 6 days of protest followed in New York City. And I want to make a special note here that the folks involved in this particular uprising were of many identities in the LGBTQ plus community. There were gay men there were also trans women there were lesbians, there were trans men, and I put the plus sign here to symbolize additional identities that were also involved. So I've felt like there's been a particular centering of cisgendered gay men who were absolutely involved at Stonewall, but they weren't the only people there. And so during this month, it's really important to me as an Afro-Latina non-binary person to center trans people, trans women, especially Black trans women and Latina trans women and gender nonconforming people who were also at Stonewall. The year after the Stonewall riots or the Stonewall uprising or the Stonewall rebellion, activists wanted to commemorate the historic event. And a year later, they formed the Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day, which you can see here was a march throughout New York City, which has, I think, evolved into the pride marches and celebrations that we see today to commemorate the protests and uprisings that happened between police officers and members of the LGBTQ plus community in New York at Stonewall. Some key figures, marginalized figures to highlight. Want to particularly acknowledge Marsha P. Johnson, who is pictured here on my left. She's a Black transgender woman. And here to the right is Sylvia Rivera, who's a Latina trans woman. And they are icons in the transgender but LGBTQ plus community. They are well-known activists who were involved in the Stonewall riots and uprisings, but who also went on to lead many other initiatives for the transgender community, including STAR, which is an organization that you have a little bit of a banner of here that Sylvia Rivera is holding. Another figure that perhaps isn't highlighted enough is Stormé de Lavere, who's also involved at Stonewall. There are many accounts as to what happened at Stonewall. Some even believe that Stormé was the first person to push back against law enforcement who came to arrest many patrons as they were at Stonewall. Miss Major is also a icon in our community, a Black trans woman who's also a legendary veteran of Stonewall. So Miss Major Griffin. Now, since the Stonewall uprising or rebellion, the NYPD issued an apology for their harassment and surveillance of the LGBTQ plus community at that time, as it was, as I mentioned before, illegal. So they issued an apology for their practices at the time. Since Stonewall, we have seen many other cities in the United States organize pride marches to commemorate what happened at Stonewall. So, this is a photograph from a gay pride march you see there in Philadelphia in June 1972. Just also to mention that there were many other uprisings before Stonewall. So while Pride Month is in June to commemorate the Stonewall riots and uprisings, there were others that predate Stonewall that are also celebrated and acknowledged during Pride. Some, and there are many others here, but just given our time constraints, just want to highlight a few. So in 1959 in Los Angeles, there was a large demonstration uprising at Cooper's Donuts. And in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, there's a Compton cafeteria riots in 1966. Also wanted to highlight Dewey's lunch counter protests, which happened in Philadelphia in 1965, where 150 people who were gender variant, members of the LGBT plus community, were refused service. So they staged a large protest. Speaking of Philadelphia, wanted to take a moment to highlight the different flags that are highlighted during Pride Month and the communities that they represent. So in Philadelphia, we had the first flag that added black and brown stripes to the traditional LGBT flag, which was represented here by these rainbow colors. Folks in Philadelphia, many activists and community organizers wanted to include the black and brown stripes to draw attention to a series of racist incidents that were happening in the gayborhood or the gay enclave in Philadelphia. So they wanted to acknowledge the racism that was happening in their own community and to raise awareness for it and to remind people that Black and Brown people are also a part of the LGBT community and that we still experience racism even within our own LGBT community. Now, I mentioned in the first video the transgender flag, which is represented here by the white, pink, and blue stripes. There is also this rather recent flag, which you'll see is a combination of the three flags I mentioned earlier. So over to the right here, we have the traditional rainbow LGBT flag. We have the black and brown stripes, which came out of Philadelphia. And then we also have the white, pink, and blue stripes, which are the transgender flag. So I feel like this flag is trying to address many things in one, but particularly the marginalization that transgender people and especially transgender black and brown people can face within the LGBT community itself and the world at large. I also wanted to highlight another acronym that I'm noticing being used more frequently. So we have LGBTQ and 2S, which stands for Two Spirit, which acknowledges our indigenous and native communities who have a very long history of celebrating multiple genders and sexualities. So you may notice that as well. And the plus symbol, which I referenced earlier, uh, is a symbol to denote many other identities in this community, like agender folks, asexual folks, pansexual folks. So the plus, I think, is also being used more widely to recognize how this community is growing. So I want to thank you all very much for watching these videos. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I hope you all have a happy and safe Pride. Thank you.